The smartphone market has peaked. We're officially in the numbers era. We went from 12 megapixels to 48 to 108 to now even up to 200 megapixels in our phones. But here's the truth, your phone isn't getting 20 times better. In fact, in some cases, it's getting worse. And today we're going to talk about the myth of megapixels. All right, let's talk about an analogy here because I like analogies. So say the sensor of your phone is like an apartment studio. Say it's just a big square and you got people in it. And say this square has 200 people in it, and we'll just put 200 dots. This represents a 200 megapixel camera sensor. So it's really cramped. People are elbow to elbow and it's really hot in there. And that represents kind of like that noise when it comes to a photo when you have a lot of megapixels crammed into a small space. Now, if you take that same area and you only put 12 dots in it, well, that's like a 12 megapixel camera. This is a lot more open and more flow, you could say, in the room. And this is kind of similar to how the pixel would act, how the megapixels would act in a 12 megapixel camera. It's able to catch more light and it's able to breathe a little bit more. And this is because a 12 megapixel camera has more room and is physically larger and is capable to grab more light. If more megapixels equals better cameras, why isn't these cameras getting better? So if megapixels are so bad, then why does Samsung, Xiaomi, why do all these phone companies go higher and higher in these megapixels? Well, there's something that the phone does that you probably don't notice or don't even know that it does, and it's called pixel binning. And this is where you take, if you look at that same studio apartment, you have 200 people and then you condense it into 48 or even 12. So the phone, the sensor, is able to have this big sensor. It's got 200 megapixels and it's able to squeeze these megapixels into bigger ones, which is able then to catch more light. So think of a bucket of water, and this represents a bucket, meaning the megapixel. And if it's raining, the rain going into the bucket is equal to light going into the sensor. Now, the more buckets you have that are really small, the harder it is it's going to capture rain than if you have 12 really big buckets. And this is kind of similar. So now think if you have 200 really small buckets in a small space, and then you condense that into like 48 bigger buckets, but it's the same space, you're able to catch a lot more rain. And this is what these phones are doing with their sensors. They're able to pixel bin all the pixels, these megapixels, into bigger areas to capture more light. Because when it comes to taking pictures, well, light is king. The more light you have, the better the photo. That's why you could have an iPhone that has a 12 megapixel camera compete with these new phones that have, 100 plus megapixels because, well, it has only 12 megapixels. It's able to capture more light in the photo than the pixel or than the phone with more megapixels. Even though these newer phones are probably pixel binning, that's why the iPhone took forever to switch these megapixels, because it was doing so well. It was able to capture a lot of light. And this is why if you have a phone that has a 200 megapixel option and you use the actual 200 megapixels and you go into a dark room, the quality of the picture isn't going to be as good because it's using all 200. When if you didn't have that on, it would pixel bin and combine all these pixels to make it maybe a 12 or 48 megapixel picture to capture more light, so it's able to brighten the picture and you're able to get more contrast. Okay, so my iPhone can do 12 megapixels and up to 48. So I'm going to take two separate photos and you're going to have to try and tell me which one they are. When you look at these two different photos, especially when you zoom in, you'll be able to start telling the difference of these photos. From a distance, it looks the same, but once you start looking in, you can start seeing the finer details. If you look at the shadows, some might look a little bit more blurred than the others. And this is the difference between more megapixels than not. So if you have higher megapixels with a lot of light, it's able to capture more detail. But a lot of times, these cameras are getting cameras of the year, and they all do this thing called HDR, where it takes 10 different photos and then it condenses it into one. So it takes 10 to 15 different photos of different contrasts, different things, and it'll combine into one to stitch you the best photo. So nowadays, megapixels doesn't really necessarily matter as much as your computer system, because all the AI, all the background things are going on. If you look at, like, Samsung or Google, sometimes you take a picture, even Apple, and you click the photo and like a second later it lights up with like more dynamic range, better lighting. And this is all due to the and this is all due to the chip, the AI, all that background stuff that's doing to these photos to make your picture better. And so nowadays we're living in an era where the software matters so much when it comes to these photos, because now it can even take a bad photo and clean it up and make it look sharper, even though the original photo wasn't that good. But because the software is so good, it's able to take these pictures, these videos, and make them look sharper because the software is super good. And it's not because of the megapixels per se, they do play a part, but the software plays a big. Now, I wouldn't necessarily focus too much on the megapixel count. I'm more focused on the size of your sensor, because you could have a 12 megapixel camera that has a small sensor and a 12 megapixel camera that has a large sensor. Well, obviously the one with the larger sensor is going to win because it has more light. It's able to capture more light. It's like having 12 small buckets, 12 large buckets. Well, of course, larger buckets are going to get more water. So same thing with a camera. The larger the sensor, more light it's going to capture, plain and simple. So make sure you look at that when you buy a camera. When it comes to phones, there's only so big of sensors because it has to cram it all in a small space. But especially if you're going into actual photography and getting a big actual camera, make sure you look at the sensor size. Make sure you look at the stabilization too, because you can have a high megapixel large sensor, but if the stabilization's bad, your videos are gonna be really bad as well. Phones do a really good job at using software to keep things stable, but again, if you're getting an actual camera, make sure you look at this. And also make sure you look at the aperture. This is how much light is let into your camera, so you can either increase or decrease. And so being able to have an option is super nice when it comes to taking photos. To sum it all up, megapixels don't tell the full story. There's the sensor, the size of it. There's the software. There's a lot of things that go into it. So make sure you kind of know what you're getting into when you buy a camera or a phone. And if you see a 200 megapixel smartphone camera, do a little bit of research, see how big the sensor is, because if it's in low light, it probably is not going to perform as well as maybe a 48 megapixel camera. But there you have it. Comment down below if you'd rather have a 12 megapixel or a 200 megapixel camera. And if you learned something, drop it down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.